There we go. Hi. Sorry. Uh, Welcome to the Professional Artist. This is Lazarus Chernik standing in for Echo Chernik. You're listening to us in the United uh, United Public Radio Network, broadcasting 107.7 out of New Orleans, simulcast on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and wherever fine goods are sold. My name is Lazarus Chernik. I am a longtime artist, creative director, art director for advertising agencies, as well as client side, which means that I worked for businesses besides agencies, that hire agencies or work with them. I have managed art studios and artists for many years. Echo, the illustrator who hosts this channel, is my wife, and we've had a long career parallel with each other and taught each other many things over the years. Today, Echo is out doing incredibly important things, and I am going to share with you a little bit about scams in the art world. Now, it's a little bit of a sensationalist topic, but it's incredibly important, and it's part of a lecture that I give to artists and the illustrators of the future workshop in Hollywood every single year. This year, I wasn't really able to give it for time purposes, but I'm going to share it here. So I'm trying to be logged into YouTube and a few other places and through StreamYard, hopefully to see questions you might have. If you have them, please post them, and I will do my best to read them in time and to answer them. But ultimately, I want to make sure that I'm clear. Scams in the art world are nothing new. They evolve, they change, and these are pretty much universal for both artists and people who hire artists, even in the fine art world. I'm going to not talk about fine art right now, just talk about commercial art. And I'll give both sides a fair chance. Actually, not both. There are three sides to the art world for this topic. There are times when artists can manipulate their clients unjustly, unfairly, and there are times in which clients can absolutely abuse their relationship and contracts with artists. And then there's a third part. There are artists, an illustration, commercial art adjacent businesses and industries that can get involved and can cause issues. The vast majority of these relationships work out perfectly fine. The trick is that once someone becomes reputable, then you really only work with reputable companies. But if you're new in any one of those three sides of the equation, then you can be subject to problems. And I'm not talking about problems of people who just aren't very competent. I'm talking about, there are people who are new and they make mistakes. I'm not talking about people who make mistakes, because that just happens. And if everyone in the negotiation process and the working process is working, in good faith with each other, then the project will come out all right. In fact, the words "in good faith" are often inside the contracts written with artists, that the artists are working in good faith, that the client is providing them with everything that they need to do it, and the clients are working are going into this relationship in good faith that the artist is going to interpret their notes properly, and that they're going to be working their best to get everything done in a timely manner and effectively. Looking at my little notes here. So what I am talking about are people who deliberately go into relationships with the intent of abusing the other party. And these are things that artists absolutely have to watch out for, because we're small businesses, we're micro businesses, and technically, um, and there are a lot of people out there who are trying to take advantage of them, because artists rarely have a lot of business experience, and new artists are often incredibly eager to get their career started and will make mistakes listening to too much praise, and too many people waving, too many handshake deals. Um, so let's begin with artists that can scam clients. First of all, in this entire conversation, all names and details are going to be withheld to protect the guilty. All right. I'm going to be telling actual stories from my career and from things I've witnessed of other people's careers. So, artists scamming clients. Now, it's not common at all. All right, it really isn't. Most of the complaints that I have heard from clients complaining about their artist scamming is boils down to the client wanting more than they could afford to get, and they feel that their valuation of what they were hiring for is inaccurate. A small business, a micro business, such as an independent author or a small mom and pop shop, to them, a $500 investment is a huge amount of money, and they are expecting a huge amount of work to be done for that. But that's a good faith thing. If the artist is upfront with them, then that's just a difficult relationship. That's not a scam. The most common scams that are actually aimed at businesses with not a lot of money. There are some aimed at businesses with a lot of money, but here are just a few of the most common ones to watch out for. Anytime you see an advertisement that says unlimited changes, that there's no such thing. Um, there used to be a lot of websites advertising, we can do a logo, unlimited changes. We'll do your book cover, unlimited changes for a flat fee. There's no such thing. For the most part, that those businesses are trying to work in good faith with a portion of their clients, people who will accept what they're given and maybe ask for one or two changes. But uh, as I said, the clients who think that their budget is a huge amount of money for them to invest in often are also very uh, detail oriented in wanting to make sure that they get the biggest bang for their buck. This is called return on investment, or ROI for short. The problem with unless someone has the training and the experience necessary to evaluate the artwork that they're hiring, whether it be a logo or a photograph for an ad or a video or an animation of some sort, that if they don't have the training expertise and they're just doing it themselves, that they can get trapped inside their own head, imagining things to be possible that are not possible. For instance, uh, wanting to have a portrait of someone that's painted absolutely perfectly, realistically, as if it was a photograph. The artists who can do that are not cheap, and hiring somebody on a budget to do that, you're not going to succeed. So when you hire, these places prey upon clients wanting to get the most that they can out of it. And by advertising unlimited changes, they're literally luring in the clients who really want that level of control. And what happens is that the client will go in and they'll get something, and it may actually be pretty good, but they may not understand how good it is. And this is where the slippery slope happens. They'll want to make a change. and they'll make the change, and the company will make the change without question. Red flag number one: they make the change without question. Sorry, red flag number two. And then things will start going awkward and awry, and the client will ask change after change after change. And what happens is that after each change, the response time with the company gets longer and longer and longer. And this might be okay if the billing practices were different. In every case I am personally aware of with companies that do this, because I investigated it years ago, is that they all demand to be paid upfront. So it's a flat $700 fee, unlimited changes. And what happens is that after the fourth or fifth change, maybe even after the second or third, the emails stop getting replied to. And, the client starts getting desperate. They need it quicker. They need it done, the way they want it. And technically, according to the contract that was signed, there's no time limit. So, or there usually isn't a time limit. And so they can claim unlimited changes. They just can't fit it in right now. If you're willing to wait a week, a month, a year for the next change, well, then it still fits into the unlimited thing. So you can't go after them and sue them. Additionally, most of those places are actually outside of the United States. And this is both good and bad. I'm not going to criticize artists outside of the United States, because there are some amazing artists all over the world. I mean, I met an artist once from the Philippines who was absolutely fantastic, but he could survive on $3 US dollars a day. So he could charge dramatically less than an American artist. And he was amazed. However, in my conversation with him, even he ran into people asking for too many changes, and he had to put those walls up. I mean, paying someone like that $700 to do a work of art, that's the equivalent of paying a US artist who wants to charge $30 an hour. That's like paying them $7,000. That's a lot of money. However, artists don't only work on one project at a time. And the unlimited changes concept has the illusion that this is a person who is basically an employee dedicated to sit in a chair and do whatever you tell them for as long as it takes. And unless you actually have them sitting in front of you, that's not how it works. You send in the request and they have to get to it because they're working with other projects, other clients. So the unlimited changes thing is just, the term makes it a scam, because it's not. They're never actually unlimited. I'll move on to the next one. And this, all right, clip art and stock photos. Now, they are not scams. Those are all created by artists, but often they're paid very, very little. But the scam is not the clip art and the stock art themselves. The scam is industries around it that say that clip art and stock photos are just as good when a administrator picks them as when a professional artist picks them. And that's not the case. Art is in the eyes, okay? It's all about how you see. And artists train their eyes to see things. We see things differently. We see details differently. And so, how many of you seen these? And this is, sorry, I'm used to giving this as a room full of people. I'm sure you've seen videos, TikToks and YouTube, or just friends, where they have examples of advertisements and billboards and logos that not only don't work, but they're laughably wrong. That their entire channels dedicated to these, symbols and art and text and logos that have a lot of rude subtext in them that people who were involved didn't see. For instance, most famously right now, there is a baseball team that called Oyster Shuckers or something like that, and they hired a logo. They hired a company to do a logo, and the logo that was designed and approved by the baseball team was extremely, extremely reminiscent of a woman's genitalia. And I don't want to get blocked or anything. I'm using proper terms, but this is also, it's all over YouTube. You can look it up. And the internet went wild nuts with it. And the baseball team was embarrassed when they were told they had a marketing department. People in marketing approved this. And apparently the marketing director came out and said, well, no one internally saw what the internet saw. Well, thing is, if millions of people see something that you don't, you're wrong. And if you didn't see it, you were not qualified to oversee that project. You were not qualified to check that. And artists, art directors, graphic designers, illustrators, when we are looking at photographs, we're not just looking to see if, it has the right subject. Does it have a Mexican woman holding a baby? That's what the context was. If it doesn't just say that, they're not just looking for that. They're looking for, is the person wearing the right blouse color? Is the baby seen? Is the baby happy? Is the baby elevated too high? In such a way that it gets in the way of the logo? Is the background soft focus or detailed focus? Is it going to be difficult to lay type over it? Lots and lots and lots of decisions that are all part of the artistic process involved in producing a effective advertisement or marketing campaign. But there are many graphic design outlets online and websites that say, hey, we have a library of things for you to use. They're all just as good. Hire us. You can and go in and just plug and play everything that you want, and you're good to go. And they're not good to go. They may be carefully cultivated initially, but they're not cultivated for the client's specific purpose. And I call this a scam because they know it. And the people who sign up for these don't know it. And that is disingenuous. Next thing is, with all due respect for the incredible artists that are all around the world outside of the United States, that companies, that websites that will link a U.S. business to an artist overseas to do things, is a bit of a scam because they're not comparing apples to oranges. They're comparing apples to oranges. Okay. An artist in the Philippines might be perfectly good for the Philippines and for who they are working with. They need someone to work with them to make sure that everything goes well in any other culture that they're associated with, because there are differences. There are cultural differences that I need to go into details with to explain. Colors, for example. Colors are a huge difference. What colors mean in the United States culturally is not the same as what colors mean in China, in Japan, Israel, South America. And the Australia Aborigines. And colors are very important. For instance, the Australia Aborigines have an art style and an art philosophy that takes the limited natural pigments that they have and associates important cultural meaning to when they paint. The color black when they paint it, as taught to me by an Aboriginal artist. Okay, if there's someone who disagrees with it, disagree with them. I'm just reporting it. The color black to them means humanity, people, because they all have dark skin. The color red means the earth, not brown, red, because where they live, there's so much iron in the soil that the soil around them is very, very, very reddish in hue, like red clay. The color yellow means the sun. It means light. And the color white means death and the spirit world. They have very limited palettes because of historically, because they were all natural. But you can see how if someone's going to put together a work of art from that culture and apply it to this culture, and they're going to paint something black to represent humanity, the United States market will get a little confused. Now, you can call it, I don't mean to make it sound racist. It's just the overall cultural doesn't recognize the color black specifically representing humanity. Okay. In fact, there really isn't a color in the United States that universally means humanity. It's been a long time since Crayola got rid of the quote unquote flesh colored crayon. We don't use that anymore. The most important color in China is red. Red is a sacred color on many different levels. And if you want to represent anything that is healthy or powerful or vital, you better make sure that you are showcasing the color red. But do not try and apply that to Mongolia, because maybe an outsider would look at the two countries and say, well, they're right next to each other. They have a long history together. They're obviously, the same culture. No. In Mongolia, the most important sacred color is blue. It is absolutely critical. You can Google photographs they have monuments where people will travel from a long ways and they will tie blue pieces of cloth in a ritual. And these monuments will have thousands, tens of thousands of blue cloths tied to them for this spiritual connection. And here's a very personal experience. I was once with a company that was founded by some people from Israel. And we were putting together a project. They hired me to run their art department. And we were putting together a catalog that they wanted to represent, to appeal to the entire national audience of the United States. Well, the national audience of the United States is a weird way of phrasing it. They just want it to be mainstream. Well, mainstream things in the US can be any color, but if you want to grab attention from somebody, you should use red. If you want it to be masculine, you probably want to put some heavy amounts of black in there. But if you want to appeal to more families, blue is a better choice. If you're going to be appealing to people and you're dealing with food, you want to make sure that you're using food colors like green and red and orange and yellow, things that associated with edible foods. So I was putting together and proposed all of these designs for the catalog. It was a startup company that were in all these colors that represented, the United States culture. And at one point, the operations manager, again from Israel, got really upset with me for showing him things that didn't make any sense to him. He's like, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. And I'm thinking, that's a weird phrase. What do you mean it doesn't work? Finally, he stood up and said, no, you have to understand. The most important colors are blue and silver. You make the entire thing blue and silver. Well, in Israel, the colors of blue and silver are and white are very, very culturally significant. That doesn't translate over here. There's no universal emotional connection to blue and silver as colors. Banks use it, but they're using the color blue to represent ubiquity, the sky. They're not. It's not a passionate color in any sense, at least not the generic standards of blue and indigo. And I had to explain to him that, that this isn't Israel, that the colors aren't there. Well, he wouldn't listen. He insisted. So I did it. I mean, I made it attractive, but it's, you know, it was the first iteration, and I was going to be there for years, and we were going to obviously evolve it and change. And eventually, I felt that I could skew them. Um, but related to this was another conversation that happened, um, related to symbols, same company, and that they were insisting that I make this catalog that was going to contain mostly kitchen appliances. 80% of the catalog were kitchen appliances, and furniture. Things like cribs and beds and irons and toasters, microwaves. And there was like 2 pages of televisions, electronics, and there was like half a page of, high-end things like cars and stuff. It was basically just a catalog that, was had the entire gambit of things that you might find at Walmart or any of the big, box stores. And through the design process, like around the 4th one, they were complaining they weren't getting a lot of traction. And I said, well, I think that some of the iconography here and some of the language being used there is very blingy. It's very in your face, eccentric. They wanted everything to have big, bold, jaggedy stars, like sail, sail, sail. And they wanted to push all the high-end electronic items and things. And I brought it up to the operations manager. I came to him and I sat down in a meeting. I called a meeting and I said, we should be changing and skewing our design process so that we were making it more appealing to women in the country. And the look on his face was a combination of shock and disgust. And I was confused. And I started to describe that, how that, women had a different sensibility, and what they wanted out of these products was different. And, that their sensibility about making these purchases was different. And he stopped me with one of the most horrific things I've ever heard, and out of touch things I've ever heard. He said, I won't do the accent because but it was a very thick accent. And he said, no, Lazarus, I didn't realize when hiring you that you didn't understand marketing. And I went, what? He said, men are the ones. This is as verbatim as I can remember. Men are the ones who decide when to buy a refrigerator, what refrigerator to buy, how much to pay for it, and what color it's going to be. I'm pausing to let the shock and laughter wave over the airwaves right now. Because I stopped and told them, I said, not in the United States. In the United States, men are not the ones, especially in couples and families, who decide when to buy a refrigerator. There's something wrong, it breaks. That's not their decision. Somebody else does. When it's time to redecorate, that's usually not their decision. Obviously, I'm being generous, but I am a lot more accurate in this generalization. Women and mothers, not just housewives, but the wives, are the ones who, the refrigerator is important to, not because it's a kitchen thing, but because it's utilitarian. And the general culture of men, like, that's not, it's not sexy to think about a refrigerator. They don't really think going out and buying an iron or a hot pot for their tea is, something that is, that is really a masculine thing for them to go buy. And I told him, like, maybe in other countries like Israel or the other countries this company was in, France, Spain, Taiwan. I said, maybe these other countries, those cultures have the man of the house, as it were, had those interests and that levels of control. But the overall culture of the United States to this day is, you know, that men don't care about refrigerators. They don't care about irons. They hand those decisions over to their wives. Obviously, single people don't apply, but even then, single men, I don't really overall don't care. These are cultural things, and that was someone inside of this country, a client wanting to apply outside cultural influences onto their own campaigns to ruin them. If you are a client and you hire an artist outside of this country, they may not understand what you're trying to get across and how things are different. Another related story: I am an author. I wrote an urban fantasy book as well as some short stories. I won an award for one of my short stories, yay me. Uh, but when I was going to indie publish my novel, I went looking for an artist, and I found an artist who had some pretty impressive elements on his portfolio. And he turned out to be in Russia. I had no problems with them being in Russia. Their portfolio was magnificent. There are great artists everywhere. And my story, the main character of my novel is a Chinese American, and I wanted her depicted in a particular way. And so I sent off all this information and negotiated. I paid. And I sent photo reference of what's my information of what she should look like overall. And he kept sending me back sketch after sketch after sketch. And each of the sketches were rather manga like, a little anime like, just rough. And we noodled down about the things. And finally, I said, okay, the pose is okay. The scenario is okay. Okay, good. So when am I going to get the final? And he said, oh, I should have it done in an hour or two. And I said, what do you mean the final, that your portfolio has photorealistic paintings of people? I need this to look like a real woman, not a manga character. Why do I say manga? It's manga. Anyway, it looks like a manga or an anime character. And I need it to look like she's a real person. And I sent him photographs of other books that I needed to compare to. And the conversation responded, now he wasn't scamming me. All right. This is just a story about the cultural difference. I think he ended up scamming me, but being in the middle of Russia, he hadn't ever met an Asian woman before. He had no access to Asian models. He had no access to Asian women outside of the photographs that he might see. Now, I hired him because he had one of his portraits was of an Asian character. Well, it turns out that he had just fully rendered and drew by with graphite a magazine ad of an Asian model, which is fine. You can use an Asian model, but he didn't even know how to look for them. And the more I discussed things and I looked at everything, that outside of that one image that he had painted, that was a direct photographic copy of an ad, all of his understanding of Asian characters were completely what we would call racist in this country, because he had no interaction with them. I mean, he was giving them slanty eyes and he was giving them, some really awkward techniques, things that they don't even do in manga because that's not it. And obviously I had to stop that relationship and abandon it. I couldn't work with that. That's not what I wanted. But it's, again, cultural differences. He was not in a position to know anything about what I actually needed. And this is, these are things that you have to be careful of. And so that's why I say that, these guru.com and a few others, that go overseas, they don't warn you. And if you're an art director, like I am, and you can work with someone like I was trying to, then you might be able to get a good result. However, I was not, because I didn't understand the barriers of it. I didn't understand that, he finally told me he lived like 75 miles away from the nearest city, in a farm community. He barely had the internet. He had never met an Asian person in his life. He had never met a black person in his life. So everything, while he was a qualified artist, that he wasn't experienced in anything that would mean something to my project. And so you have to be careful with that. All right. Now, lastly, we're going to talk. Oh, sorry. Now, clients can scam artists. So I'm going to look for any. I don't see any requests or comments or questions right now. Thank you for your patience. Let's talk about how clients scam artists. Well, I had a boss once who, every time we were talking to a design agency or web design firm, he bullied into the meeting and sat down and said, "I don't know anything about art. I'm in control of the bills. I pay everything here. That I don't know what you're doing. I can't evaluate it, but I'll pay for it when it proves itself." He said that, like, you do the work, give it to me for free, and when I decide that it's worth it, then I'll pay you. Well, that's absolutely a scam, because I know, because he was my boss, I knew for a fact that he did not intend on paying them ever at all. He would use every excuse possible to say it wasn't worth it. And he would even keep going back to them for quote unquote unlimited changes. I actually befriended one of the agencies that he said that to, and we're friends today. And we kind of look back on, us having a relationship with that person with a bit of disgust, and we toast that we survived it. Um, no business is a predictable machine. If it was a predictable machine to just churn out, money, then you wouldn't need to advertise. You wouldn't need to market at all. So claiming that marketing, advertising, and artists' work isn't predictable enough to be valuable is just hypocrisy. That if you're hiring somebody to do something, then it's all about hope. Strategic hope. You have to make sure that you've got the right people in place to manage things and get the right result. But again, everything's a toss-up. You never know. And you can do an amazing, great thing and put it up there, and then suddenly, instead of your ad going out there, there'll be some cultural phenomenon that will jump in and interrupt everything. There's a famous example of the actor David Hasselhoff was held a concert. He was a musician, he was a singer, and he wanted to convert from his fame from being an actor into a singer. So he made a relationship with a cable company to broadcast his concert, and he filled a concert hall with lots of people. He had all the musicians lined up, everything was done, and right about the same time in which he was going to be giving this concert to introduce himself to the world, that suddenly O.J. Simpson's escape from the police car chase took over every single station and the entire country's attention. Nobody paid attention to anything he was doing. I mean, it was just like no one was talking about anything. He had hired PR companies and marketing companies. He had all these posters. Nobody cared. And then you have the disaster with the towers collapsing in 9/11. There was actually a record album by a rap group that was going to be released, and they were, an underground rap group, and they had things to say about politics and commerce, and so they actually had artwork where the rap group was in front of the Twin Towers, and the Twin Towers were on fire because they wanted to show how they were, anti-capitalist, and they were just about to release it, and then the Twin Towers came down. Suddenly, they couldn't release that. They just couldn't release the album. I don't know what happened. I don't know. I don't think they became famous, but they became famous for that almost mistake. Can you imagine if that was released on the day before or the week before that? Gosh. So, expertise is your only protection against unpredictability. Clients arguing contract terms. Contracts with artists are firm and concrete. Okay. And there are two ways that clients abuse artists around contracts. First of all, they argue the terms of it going through. Perfectly reasonable terms, they argue. I don't mean they ask for changes. I mean they argue, they get upset, they make sure that they call you instead of email you, and to bully the artist around. In our combined 65 years of experience with art contracts, there has not been a single client who has argued the terms of a contract that did not immediately try to break that contract. Every single one who argued it tried to break it. And 99% of the clients who signed a contract without argument or even any changes paid on time. So, red flag. Arguing the terms of the contract, there are two reasons for that. One is, well, they don't like the terms. And sometimes the terms are, there are terms in the contract that protect the artist against the client abusing them. Well, they'll get all upset about that. If they don't understand, the payment structure, they don't understand copyright fees and all that, that's a conversation. That's not getting upset. They might think that they're getting scammed, they may get upset, but the reality is that's not a scam. That's just the way it is. They just need to be educated. But when a client turns around and starts screaming about, getting all these emotional words and language about how, you're trying to take advantage of them, and the work hasn't even begun, that is a huge, huge, huge scam. Get away from those clients as quickly as possible. We had a client, for example, I will not bring up any details about this, that not only did they argue the terms of the contract relentlessly, they handed their contract over to their lawyer, who wasn't actually a contract lawyer. They are a copyright attorney. They were a corporate lawyer, which is a different type of law, who is their friend and neighbor. So ultimately, we happen to know our business, and so we made sure that we wrote all these things into it. And they insisted to have work for hire in the contract, which they didn't need. And work for hire is a bit of a scam in and of itself, but that's another entire other conversation. And we insisted that it was going to be a copyright buyout situation where Echo and I do the artwork and then they buy the copyrights from us. They own it outright. The only difference between that and work for hire is that work for hire means that we could never claim that we did the artwork publicly. We could do it on a portfolio, but not publicly, that they would own everything. Now, it doesn't make any sense for almost anything. Copyright buyout is better. But this person insisted that was work for hire. We insisted that was going to be copyright buyout. And finally, their lawyer allowed both to be in. Okay, it's a work for hire contract, but we'll buy the copyright from you. And he left this in the contract. And the artist owns everything until the contract is paid in full. A work for hire contract doesn't work like that. Work for hire contract is basically just an hourly rate. You work for us, you own nothing. And then if we fire you, all the work that you've done is ours, no matter what. Well, eventually the relationship fell apart. As I said, things do with anyone who argues the contract. And they tried to fire us. And we just showed our contract to our copyright attorney and said, "Hey, do they have what's going on here? This is kind of a weird situation." I kid you not, our copyright lawyer jumped back from the table. I'm not kidding. Stood up from the table, backed away, dropped it down like it was a bomb. And he said, "That is the legal equivalent of dividing by zero. You cannot have copyright and work for hire in the exact same contract." They literally cancel out the contract. The contract does not exist. And because of that, then all the money that they paid us up to that point, we have no contract saying that, why they paid us. And we have no contract saying we owe them anything. But the law says that all the art that we did is ours because we don't have a contract that we sold it. So that means that he paid us, but he owns nothing. A couple days later, apparently he found this out, called us up, instead of yelling, sort of being very humble and say, "Oh, let's try and work something out," and eventually, bought out what we had done and walked away from it. But it was obviously this person was working really, really hard to scam us and to try and bully us out of the system. You have to be very careful when dealing with contracts. You have to know what you're doing. If you're an artist, please, please, please get a copy of the Graphic Artists Guild Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. It's a thick book. It will make your entire life easier, and read it. And if you have a client, or you are potentially going to hire artists, you can get PDFs of it, pick them up, go through. It helps explain why prices are what they are. Oh, by the way, I just remember talking about earlier about the same thing about cultural differences. That's the same problem with AI. AI doesn't know what it's doing. It's just copying what others do. And that is a scam. Not to mention that everything it says is stolen. But going back to other scams. Adjacent businesses. Okay. There are great agents out there. All right. There are great licensing agents out there. There are great art supply materials companies out there. And there are great software companies out there. There are also business people who are taking great products and services and doing some weird things with them. And then there are just some really awkward scams. Art agents. Ultimately, I have an entire blog about agents. I could talk about that for an hour by itself, but the reality is, unless an agent is able to represent an artist full time, and that artist never has to get work from any other venue, then the agent is not worth an exclusive contract. There are predatory agents, who used to and still do, go to artists and say, "Sign this exclusive contract with us that you don't work with any other agents, and you will never work with any clients without us." And then, not only will they probably not have enough work to keep that artist alive, that if the artist decides that they can't do it, there'll be no end to the contract. So anytime the artist does work outside of the contract just to feed their families, the agent will turn around and say, "Oh no, you owe me a percentage of that." That's a scam. Don't accept anyone who wants exclusivity without, guaranteeing results, and certainly not without an escape clause for you as an artist. Art supplies and materials. It's weird. It's not necessarily the actual suppliers, but it's not the actual manufacturers, but it's the suppliers. They'll say they have things when they don't. They'll say they have things, they can get it to you when they can't. that and right now with the entire uh, tariff situation, that's even more complicated because they might legitimately have had them, but they can't get them anymore. Uh, licensing, licensing agents, licensing companies, licensing agents that I've never had a bad experience with them. I've never really heard of any bad experiences with licensing agents. Their entire job is to develop a relationship between a business as an artist and take a percentage of it. Okay, great. There's really nothing inherently wrong with that. However, there are clients who will look for licensing. Here's an example. Again, everything's Hecko's going to panic because she thinks I'm going to say something. Uh, there was a company that went to a licensing show, met Echo, and uh, and her licensing agent, and said, "Hey, we have a product. We want to put your art on it, and let's go from there." Great. Now, how licensing works is that a company, a manufacturer, has a product, and they look for an artist to put for art to go on that product. They pay the artist to use their art on the product, and then often there will be a percentage, a royalty for every product that the manufacturer sells that has that artist's art on it. They will also pay the artist for it. So, just making up fun numbers, they'll pay the artist $1,000, and then for every product that gets sold, that the artist gets a nickel. Simple. That's how it works. The manufacturer is responsible for selling this product to retailers and to the public. That's licensing. This company had many, 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 many problems. They were very friendly. They had a lot of problems that made them quite incompetent. But ultimately, they then came down and revealed that they said, okay, we finally manufactured it. How many are you going to buy? And we're like, we just need a few. Like, well, yeah, but how many for the entire run? We're like, what do you mean the entire run? I said, well, where are you selling them? They said. And we're like, we're not. We might sell a few directly. Where are you selling them? You're the manufacturer. You're the person who's paying less. You're supposed to pay us a check for the art and then turn around and take this product and put it into stores nationwide to sell it. I'm like, no, you're supposed to buy the product from us and then you do it. No, that was a scam. That was an absolute scam because they showed up at a licensing show not wanting to do a licensing deal. They went there under the guise of doing licensing, and then turned around and said, "Oh no, we're not actually doing licensing. We're actually selling it." I mean, if we approached when we get enamel pins made, we hire a pin company, we send them the art, they make the pins, we buy 100, 200, they come to us, and then we sell them. That's us, that we're hiring them as a vendor, as a manufacturer. This company came to us, lied to us, saying that they wanted it to be a licensing deal. So rather than them coming to us saying, hey, we want to pay you, they came to us like, hey, we want to trick you into paying us. Be very, very careful. We're almost up for today. The last one I want to talk about are software scams. And this is really difficult and really touchy. There's some extremely professional grade software out there. And one of the companies that makes is Adobe. They're famous for making their products. And they've been making those products for 40 years. Incredibly high-end, effective, consistent products. However, business-wise, their practices on the business end have offended a lot of artists who are looking for other products. There are companies who have made competing products to those software, and I have not looked into all of them. I have looked into a number of them, and many of them are very good. However, that anything that says you can use this for free is lying to you. I'm fully confident in saying that. All right, that it's not. They're getting money for somewhere from somewhere. All right, and if you don't know, then that's on you. You have to find out. You have to figure out where they are. Are they selling your information? Are they selling your your art to AI gen teaching things? Is it buried into the user license agreement that you read? Are they lying and it's not in the user license agreement, but they're doing it anyway because they need to make a profit? They need to make a profit. They need to justify all the work because these are not easy software to build. And then you have the company that say this software is, I'm just going to give an example. Okay. Software X is just as good as Photoshop. Well, Photoshop is one of the most deep, complex pieces of software ever written. There is so much redundancy built into the software. There are, and this is barely hyperbole, there are 6 ways of doing anything. However, after 35 years of working with Photoshop, actually longer than that, I think the first time I touched Photoshop was 86, 87. Anyway, there is a reason why I would use each of those 6 different ways to do something. I will do it one way to get one result. I do it way 2 to do a different result because I know the result that I want. I know how to do it, and I know the differences. And a huge amount of those differences are related to a finished physical printed product, not just a digital image. Today, in 2025, many artists are only looking at digital images and a simple inkjet process of reproduction. They want to paint, make it look good on the screen, hit print, it prints out, and it looks good. That is about 20% of what Photoshop can do. So there's software out there that can do the 20% that Photoshop can do that 20%, and they can do that well. In some cases, I'm sure some of them could even do it better. But the other 80% of what it can do is something that I need and people at my level need. And there have been compatibility issues. I've had people send me stuff from other software and they won't open up correctly. And I'm not going to toss out I am. Things like channels is a feature of Photoshop that almost no digital artist uses or cares about. Maybe they'll use masks, but not channels. They barely use CMYK profiles, but they'll almost never deal with machine profiles, monitor profiles, printer profiles, paper profiles. They'll just use whatever they have. They'll just use the P3 profile of their iPad for everything. While I have to manage, am I going to be using a US sheet fed coded, US sheet fed uncoded? Am I going to be trying to work with a Japanese profile? Should I just use standard generic CMYK? Should I use an sRGB, or should I continue to use the P3 and then should I convert it, or should I use an alternate conversion? A simulation instead of a conversion. All of these things are things that Photoshop, and I have yet to see any of these smaller ones do those things. Do they need to do them? Probably not for most people. But the language, I'm in advertising. The language that says X is identical to Y, X is exactly like Y, and you're showing, an apple versus an apple tree. They're not. You can say this apple is just as good as that apple on that apple tree, but don't compare the apple to the tree. They are different. And when Adobe charges a lot for that software and what it can do, and they also have some business practice that even I'm not happy with, to subsidize that. But you know, at least there is, that it's less, it's more transparent where their profit is going, and they're not using language that sounds really scammy. They're not telling me that I'm getting something that, they're not lying to me about how much I'm getting and then saying that what I'm getting is free. That's where the language is awful. For people who are digital artists who are using this other software, I'm not saying you're getting scammed. I'm saying that if you want to do things more than that software does, please don't assume that that is the most it can do, that there's no software that can do more than that. It's like if you're driving a Volkswagen Beetle, don't look around and say, well, there's no way I can tow an 18-foot boat. Well, you can't tow an 18-foot boat in a Beetle, but if you upgrade to a truck, you can. Don't blind yourself to say that you can't do it with the others. And if you are using software that says it's free or it's really, really low, please just do everyone a favor and just double check, find out what they're doing, where are they getting their money? It should, what does their contract say? Who's their parent company? Because maybe it's free to them, but they're selling everything to a parent company. Or maybe they're on the verge of going public and they're amassing information. And that's, things are going to change soon. There's a lot of things that go on in business behind the scenes that artists are not aware of and can get taken advantage of from. Anyway, thank you very much. I didn't see any questions right now. Hopefully, people will watch this on YouTube at a later time and, post questions or email us for things. And again, I was not specifically insulting anyone. The vast majority of the business is all above board, and everyone's working really, really hard to make this, to make their projects work successfully. You just have to watch out for some things and protect yourself. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. This has been The Professional Artist. I am the guest host, Lazarus Chernik. This is the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM out of New Orleans, and simulcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. You have a great day. Thank you very much.